assuming that one has gone through the steps of managing their anxiety, staying curious, acknowledging the other person's point of view, has maybe tried the DEAR strategy, assuming we've used more collaborative tools to try and resolve and get at a situation, here are a couple of tips and tricks that can work in the heat of the moment when you're not exactly sure what to say. All of them are a bit edgy. These are more advanced tools, and they are more competitive. But assuming you've been using those collaborative tools, they also are very effective at a certain point. So I'll just kind of pause in between as we review a couple of what to do when nothing else works strategies. The wow acknowledgement. Sometimes when something happens in the moment and you're not sure what to say, I had a situation, actually, it was in a maternity ward, where an obstetrics physician had suggested that perhaps one of the other members on the team may want to wear a hard hat so they wouldn't be hit by tools the obstetrics physician felt were necessary and had actually apparently accidentally hit her in the past. And when she raised it as an issue, he said, well, maybe you should be wearing a hard hat when you're working with me. And a nurse nearby, who was particularly skilled, went, wow. The wow acknowledgement doesn't say whether that was good, bad, up or down. It just simply says that's something that's really interesting that was said. It's a little less accusatory than I can't believe you said that, but it implies I can't believe you said that. So in some circumstances, when something's happened that's particularly negative, just a simple wow can have some impact. It allows the words to reverberate in the room. Hard hat, hard hat, hard hat. Perspective pairing. Perspective pairing is simply where you restate what you've understood their perspective to be, and you put it right down next to your perspective with a huge gap in between. You don't try to make one better than the other or allow theirs to be better than yours. You just allow for this huge distance to occur. It sounds like, oh, okay, so from your perspective, that went really smoothly. On my end, that was very difficult. You don't use words like but or however to join the perspectives because that sounds argumentative. Wow, so on your perspective that went well, but on my end it didn't go well. It sounds like your end is more correct than theirs and it's going to make them defensive. Put a period and start a new sentence. Or even use the word and. Oh, okay, so on your end that seemed to go well, and on my end that didn't go so well. It keeps the defensiveness low without using but or however. Discrepancy confrontations. Discrepancy confrontations are even a little bit more edgy than some of these strategies. It's where you say something that you've understood is important to the person, a value or a belief that they have. It's probably something that they said a week ago in a meeting that you heard, or you've just learned about them over time. You do want to say it in words that they have used when they've articulated it. Then you say something that they're doing that's incompatible with that. So for example, maybe I'm approaching a colleague asking if I can swap shifts for a wedding I have to go to. And my colleague is like, no, you get all the best shifts. We're going to stick with the schedule. I might say something like, well, I remember you in last week's meeting saying that we don't pitch in to help each other out enough. And now you're saying you don't want to switch shifts with me. It's edgy. It's designed to be edgy in response to somebody else who's being edgy with me if I've been using collaborative strategies that are not effective. It's called a discrepancy confrontation. Boundary setting. You may have heard of boundaries before. Boundaries are where I set what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do. And boundaries are very important to put in place with somebody who may be quite boundaryless, or where there's a risk of your own boundaries being violated. Boundaries being things that make me feel safe, allow me to feel a certain degree of professional comfort. Never bluff a boundary. Never say that I'm not going to do this thing when actually you probably will have to do that thing. Or don't say I'm going to do this thing when you're not fully prepared to do that thing. If you bluff a boundary, all that they're learning is that you're a doormat as they stampede over it. By the time you're setting a boundary, you should expect that they are going to test it. A boundary might sound like, if you're going to use language like that, I'm going to have to leave this discussion. And they'll likely continue using language like that, and you're going to have to leave the discussion. That's boundary setting. Broken record. Broken record is a particularly assertive form of boundary setting where you say it a few times over. You end up saying, like, if you're going to keep using words like that, the discussion's over. This discussion's over. This discussion's over. By the third time, that sometimes is enough to bring their intensity down. And if it's not, again, you're left with your boundary to fall to. Negative questions. Negative questions is a strategy, and again, it's a competitive, edgy strategy, when I feel overly and unduly criticized by somebody. Somebody's telling me that I'm doing this wrong and I'm doing that wrong. And maybe I've tried to stay curious with them saying, oh, okay, so what would you suggest I could do with that differently? All right, so that's something I can work on. Maybe I'm using collaborative strategies and they keep coming at me. Negative questions sound like, okay, so what else am I doing wrong there? They'll tell you. You have to kind of coat yourself in Teflon and refuse the bait a lot on this one because your strategy is to get them to hear themselves. As they're talking, I'll say, okay, and what else? And they'll tell you. And you may need to add a third time, okay, and I'll do quick summaries. So I did this wrong, what else am I doing wrong? Usually by this point they hear themselves, I'd say about 3/4 of the time, and they back off. They say, well, that's about it. Sometimes they'll keep going, and you may need the ultimate negative question, was there anything there that I did right? It's an edgy, competitive strategy, and it can be effective to get them to stop criticizing, called negative questions.